In the year of our Lord 1312, the town of Regensburg, nestled on the banks of the Danube, was not unlike any other medieval settlement, a patchwork of thatched roofs, cobbled streets, and rumors that traveled faster than the wind. The town's pride was its abbey, an imposing stone structure that loomed over the peasants below like the judgment of God himself. Behind its thick walls, pious chants echoed from dawn till dusk, and among the veiled nuns, behind quiet lips and humble eyes, lived a girl who was never meant to speak of love. Her name was Elisabeth von Keller. She was the youngest daughter of Baron Dietrich von Keller, a man so obsessed with reputation that he measured his children's worth not by their virtue, but by the alliances he could forge through them. Elisabeth, born too late to be married off profitably and too beautiful to be ignored, was sent to the abbey at the age of 13, to be silenced, hidden, and above all, controlled. The cloister would make her pious, obedient, lifeless if necessary, but the abbey walls, thick as they were, couldn't keep out the world, nor could they keep out the knights. Every Lent, the bishop's guards would come to Regensburg to protect the relics during holy procession. Among them was a young man named Thomas. He was not noble. His mother had scrubbed floors in the palace kitchens, and his father had died in a ditch fighting for a lord who never remembered his name. But Thomas was handsome, sharp-witted, and he wore his mail like it was made for him. When he walked through the abbey courtyard, the nuns bowed their heads, all except one. Elisabeth had never spoken to a man without her father in the room. But the first time she saw Thomas, something ancient stirred in her. Not lust, not yet, just recognition. As if in some past life, their fates had already been braided together. A glance turned to a stolen smile. A smile became a whispered hello beneath the archway. And soon prayers were shortened just to carve out seconds more near him. Their meetings were sinful. Not because of what they did, but because of what they dared to imagine. A world outside those walls. A world where love was not a crime, and a kiss was not treason. They met beneath the weeping willows by the riverbank, hidden in shadow, cloaked by the fog of dawn. Sometimes Thomas would bring her dried fruit from his rations. She'd laugh like a girl who'd never been locked away. He'd kiss her palms and whisper that he'd find a way to take her far from Regensburg. But love in places like this does not go unnoticed. It festers in the silence, grows in the jealous corners of the eye. It was Sister Agnes who reported them. She had once been beautiful too, before her hair fell out in clumps from the fever and the left side of her face collapsed from palsy. She had once dreamed of being wed to a knight, just like Elisabeth, and when those dreams soured, she vowed no other girl would ever live them out. Agnes followed Elisabeth one morning, barefoot on the cold stone floor, hiding behind a curtain of ivy. She saw enough, his hand on her cheek, the kiss that lingered too long. She didn't need to see more. The punishment came quickly. Elisabeth was dragged from her cell in the middle of the night. The abbess didn't speak. She only gestured, and 4 women tore the girl's habit from her. They stripped her of cloth, dignity, and innocence all at once. Cold water, cold iron chains, cold silence. At the same hour, Thomas was seized by the town guard. He didn't resist. He only asked once whether Elisabeth was safe. No one answered. Her trial was not a trial, it was a formality. Her father sat in the gallery, face like stone. He did not speak to her. He did not look at her. The bishop read the charges: fornication, disobedience, temptation, consorting with a man of impure blood. But worst of all, love. Love unblessed. Love unpermitted. Love that belonged to the devil. They claimed Thomas had bewitched her, that he used her for access to the abbey's relics, that she was seduced by a heretic and thus tainted by darkness. Elisabeth tried to speak. They gagged her. The sentence was passed in Latin. It sounded holy, but there was nothing sacred about it. She was to be excommunicated, disowned, and flayed alive for corrupting the sanctity of her body, for shaming her bloodline, and for daring to love where love was forbidden. The execution would be public, to teach the girls of Regensburg what happened to those who listened to their hearts. The sentence was delivered as though it were routine. A few words from the bishop's dry tongue, a nod from the town magistrate, and the fate of a girl was sealed in ink and indifference. Elisabeth, bound in iron shackles, knelt on the cold cathedral floor. Her lips trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of disbelief. Somewhere deep inside her, the idea of being skinned alive still felt impossible, as though her body might wake from this madness, and the nightmare would vanish like mist in morning light. But the stone beneath her knees was real. The blood on her wrists was real. And the silence in the room, that suffocating, complicit silence, was the most real thing of all. Her father left the chamber before the chains were even tightened. He did not speak to her, not one word. His reputation had been stained, and for that, he would erase her as if she had never existed. To the rest of the town, Elisabeth was already dead. What remained was a body to be punished, a warning to be carved. They did not kill her immediately. No, that would have been too kind. The abbess ordered her placed in the lowest cell beneath the convent, a crypt once reserved for plague victims, where sunlight had never touched the floor. They gave her no food, just a thin blanket and a bucket of fetid water. Each day they sent a different nun to whisper scriptures into the bars. Not for comfort, for guilt. Phrases like daggers. The flesh is the devil's vessel. The woman shall be ruled by the man. Suffering purifies, over and over again. By the fourth day, Elisabeth stopped crying. Her lips cracked from thirst. Her hair tangled in knots. Her back ached from the damp stone. But her eyes still burned. Not with fear, not even with rage, but something else, a strange, silent clarity. As if she had passed through a fire and left behind everything but her truth. They could take her name, her skin, even her life, but they would never make her ashamed of love. The townsfolk, meanwhile, were told to prepare. A public execution was rare, a flaying unheard of. People spoke of it in hushed tones, as though saying it aloud might invite damnation. Some men whispered about the last woman flayed in the kingdom, over 80 years ago, for poisoning a duke. They said her screams turned the birds black for miles, that the executioner went mad afterward. Others, especially the women, said nothing. They only stared at their daughters a little longer that week, kept them inside, prayed harder. The square was swept clean, a wooden platform built, stakes hammered in, buckets of lime prepared to scatter over the blood. And in the center of it all stood a tall post, carved roughly, with hooks embedded at shoulder height. This was where Elisabeth would stand, or rather where her body would hang. The executioner came from out of town. His name was Lucas, a silent, heavy man who smelled of tallow and old leather. He brought his own tools, knives of various shapes, each wrapped in linen and oiled to a sheen. He was paid in advance and housed in the tavern farthest from the abbey. When asked how long the flaying would take, he replied without blinking, "It depends on how much she fights." The night before the execution, the abbess visited Elisabeth one last time. She wore her finest veil, her silver cross gleaming against the black folds of her robe. She did not speak until she stood directly over the girl, who by then had grown so thin her bones showed beneath her skin. "You had the chance," the abbess said. "You could have repented. We might have shaved your head, sent you to the southern convent, made you invisible. But you chose pride, and now you will bleed for it." Elisabeth looked up. Her voice was barely more than a breath. "I chose love." The abbess said nothing, but her jaw clenched and her eyes, those pious, bitter eyes, burned with something like hatred, or perhaps envy. At dawn, the bells rang. The square filled with bodies, merchants, beggars, housewives, even children perched on shoulders, their eyes wide with curiosity. A woman was to be flayed alive, and no one wanted to miss it. The bishop arrived in procession, robes trailing behind him like a river of blood. The town guard escorted Elisabeth, shackled at wrists and ankles, her shift torn and filthy, her feet bare and bleeding. She did not scream. She did not sob. She walked as though already dead. They bound her to the post with ropes at the wrists, the ankles, and one around her waist. Her hair was pulled back, exposing the nape of her neck. The crowd murmured. Some crossed themselves. Others just stared. The bishop stepped forward to bless the execution. Let her flesh be taken from her as sin is taken from the soul. Let this be a lesson to all women who forget their place. Then he stepped back, and Lucas stepped forward. The executioner's knife was small, sharp, designed not to stab, but to peel. He began at the shoulder. The first slice was precise, a line down the upper arm, careful and shallow, not deep enough to kill, just enough to lift. He worked slowly, methodically, like a butcher at the market. The skin came away in strips, long, pale ribs that curled at the ends like parchment left too long in the sun. Elisabeth's first scream cut through the square like a blade. Children cried, women turned away, but no one left. Lucas moved down the arm, exposing red muscle beneath. Blood flowed, but not too much. The trick was to go slowly, to avoid the larger veins, to keep her conscious. He paused only to wipe sweat from his brow or to sharpen his blade. With each cut, Elisabeth's screams grew hoarse, then weaker, until finally she fell silent, not from death, but from a throat too raw to speak. After the arms came the back, then the chest, each section peeled back like layers of a fruit no one was ever meant to open. Lucas was careful. He took pride in his work. He did not flay to kill. He flayed to teach. By midday, Elisabeth no longer moved. Her head slumped forward. Blood pooled at her feet. The skin of her face was left intact, intentionally, so the crowd could still see her expression. And in those eyes, even in death, there was no shame, only defiance. They removed what remained of her body before sunset, wrapped it in coarse cloth, took it to the edge of town where criminals were buried in unmarked pits. But not all of her was buried. A strip of her skin, taken from her shoulder, was nailed to the abbey gate. As a warning, it stayed there for weeks, until the rain took it, until the wind blew it away. But the story did not fade. Women whispered it to their daughters. Men spoke of it when drunk. And some say on certain misty mornings, a girl in blood-stained white can still be seen walking by the riverbank, waiting for a boy with kind eyes and a soldier's heart, waiting for the moment she loved, before the world tore it from her. The sky, the morning after the execution, was unusually bright, almost mocking. The town of Regensburg returned to its rhythm, as all towns do. Bread was baked, markets opened, horses clopped over bloodstains, barely scrubbed from the square. But something in the air had shifted, silent, like the breath before a storm, or the hush of a church after the last prayer has been spoken. Elisabeth's name was not mentioned in public again, not in sermons, not in the streets, not even in the abbey where her soul was supposedly purified. To speak of her was to question the justice of God, and to question justice was to invite punishment. Her name was swallowed by silence, her image erased from paintings, her room given to another novice within a week. But the people remembered, quietly, reluctantly, as if memory itself were a sin. The children who had been brought to the execution now cried in their sleep. Some refused to eat. Others clutched dolls and whispered of the girl with no skin. Mothers cursed themselves for having watched. Fathers swore they would never look upon such a sentence again. Yet none stood up when it happened. No one shouted to stop it. They simply watched. And now they lived with the watching. The abbess fasted for 3 days afterward, not out of guilt, she told herself, but as cleansing. Yet her hands trembled during Mass. Her sleep became shallow. Sometimes she claimed to hear footsteps outside her chamber at night, soft and wet, as though someone barefoot and bleeding walked just beyond her door. The bishop, who had blessed the sentence, left for Würzburg shortly after. Rumor had it he'd been summoned to explain why such a brutal act was performed without consultation from the archdiocese. He never returned to Regensburg. Months later, it was said he died of a fever, raving in Latin, clutching at his own skin as though trying to tear it off. But what of Thomas, the boy Elisabeth had loved? The soldier with eyes like warm earth and hands rough from real work. He was not executed. His noble commanders intervened, citing his service to the bishopric and lack of noble blood. A commoner's foolishness, they called it. He was flogged, 50 lashes across the back, branded on the thigh with the mark of the fornicant, banished from service, left with a wound that never quite healed. He disappeared after that, for a while. Some said he drowned himself in the Danube, too ashamed to live. Others swore they saw him heading south with a pack on his shoulder and fire in his eyes. The truth came nearly a year later, when the man who ran the blacksmith's stall near the south gate received a letter. No name, just a wax seal pressed in the shape of a cross, broken, inside a simple parchment. 10 words written in a hand he recognized but couldn't place. She loved me. They flayed her. I will not forgive. The townsfolk didn't speak of the letter, but it passed from hand to hand like contraband. And with each reading, the myth of Elisabeth grew. She became something more than a girl. She became a question no one wanted to ask. Was it justice or murder wrapped in ritual? The years crawled on, and still, strange things were whispered. The abbey's fig tree, which had bloomed every spring since the first stones were laid, withered and died the next year. No reason. Its roots turned black. Its trunk split open like a wound. They tried to plant a new one. It never grew. In the chapel, the corner where Elisabeth had once prayed developed a stain, dark red like blood, shaped like a handprint. No amount of scrubbing could remove it. Eventually, they placed a rug over it. But the nuns knew what lay beneath. And then came the girls. 3 novices, in the years after Elisabeth's death, disappeared from the convent. Gone, vanished in the night without sign or struggle. The abbess claimed they fled to avoid their vows, but some whispered that they had seen a figure in white walking the halls, dripping red, eyes hollow, calling softly to them in the dark. He's waiting by the river. Superstition? Madness? Maybe. But the town remembered, even those who wished they didn't. By the 10th year, the story had changed. Children said Elisabeth had cursed the abbey, that anyone who lied in love would hear her screams in their dreams. Lovers left trinkets by the riverbank, lockets, ribbons, dried roses, as if trying to appease her spirit. A painter from Prague who visited Regensburg on pilgrimage claimed to see a ghost in the cathedral. He painted her, a young woman, stripped of skin, eyes full of grief and fire, standing beneath a cross that bled from every edge. The church banned the painting, but copies spread, and through it all the question remained. Was Elisabeth guilty, not of lust, not of betrayal, but of love? And if love is a crime, then what justice was served? In distant towns, travelers began to tell her tale. Names changed, dates blurred, but always the same image, A girl punished for love, her skin torn from her like a shroud. In some versions, she returns every spring, wearing a robe of lilies and blood, searching for Thomas. In others, she watches silently, waiting for the day when her death is remembered, not as a lesson, but as a sin. Centuries passed. And yet, if you go to Regensburg today, to the old quarter, there's a narrow street behind the cathedral. Most maps don't mark it. Locals call it Flayer's Lane. At its end stands a broken gate, twisted iron stained with rust that never fades. No one knows who forged it, or why it's never been replaced. But if you go there at night just before dawn, some say you'll hear footsteps. Not fast, not angry, just slow, careful. And sometimes, just sometimes, you'll see her. Not bleeding, not broken, but whole. A girl with fire in her eyes and a voice like wind through leaves, standing beside a young man with hands that tremble when they reach for hers. She smiles, he nods, and together they walk toward the river, as if this time, finally, no one will stop them.